The labor market today has changed dramatically and has experienced a profound transformation. But in some sense, things are very different but similar to how they were 100 years ago. Jobs in our modern times today have quite a bit in common with Charlie Chaplin's modern times then. These are actually not good times for work. A typical worker today is a sales assistant for maybe a clothing chain like Zara or Mango in La Maquinista or Gran Via Dos. More than ever in history, she, currently half of the workforce is female, has some higher education, she is emotionally intelligent, she knows how to deal with customers, she will be computer literate to process data, and if she deals with tourists, she will actually speak some different languages. Yet, her wage has stagnated over the last few decades, despite the fact that we've seen economic growth. With such low wages, more and more people of working age stay out of the labor force. These are not unemployed workers, people who want to work but they don't find a job. These are people who actually are discouraged. They don't want to work because the wages are too low. Now, on some other dimensions, things seem to have improved. But this is also somewhat of a myth, because the improvement is in the following sense. The duration of jobs now is longer. People hold on to their jobs for longer times, although this does not necessarily square with our perceptions, because we think that our parents and grandparents had jobs for life. This is not what the data says. People have longer jobs now than they had decades ago. But the point is that this perception apart, that this longer duration of jobs is good, of course, for job security. The point is that this comes at a cost. Labor markets are actually less dynamic, and as a result, there is less social mobility. It is harder to find jobs, and the movement up the job ladder towards better jobs with more responsibility has actually slowed down, and this is significant. This is actually bad if you're looking for a job. Fewer people switch jobs, therefore fewer jobs become vacant, and it takes longer time to find one. A friend of mine returned from the banking sector in London, where he moved up through the ranks very quickly, and he returned here to Barcelona to work for La Caixa. In La Caixa, promotions are rarer than rain in the desert. You only get promoted when someone retires or when someone dies. The great Paul Samuelson, the Nobel laureate in economics, said this about scientific progress around the table with economics professors. But I guess it can be paraphrased around the table of any human resource meeting in a Spanish company. Promotions happen funeral by funeral by funeral. And stagnating wages and limited upward mobility are actually already part of the current labor market and the current economy. But what does the future bring? Well, according to experts, during your careers over the next 40 years or so, there will actually be superhuman computers. And I'm not talking about a computer that can win a game of chess against Garry Kasparov. I am actually talking about a computer performing creative, difficult, and time-consuming tasks, like writing a PhD, for example, and maybe in 10 minutes. Now, for most of you, I think artificial intelligence is science fiction, but I'm trying to convince you that this is actually already very much a science fact. You know that jobs that require a significant level of thinking, such as travel agents, secretaries, librarians, are already disappearing. And this process will affect more and more jobs, including low qualification jobs. It's likely that truck and taxi drivers are disappearing, but also high qualification jobs, lawyers, architects, and yes, also some jobs for economists. What this means is that the market for work is becoming more and more polarized with extremes. It's going to be a winner-takes-all market. There's going to be extremely lucrative jobs for some, and there's going to be a lot of repetitive, less gratifying and low-paid jobs for many. I'm confident that all of you with your UPF degree will be able to find your way towards these more gratifying winners' jobs. Unfortunately, though, for those with lesser qualifications, it will take longer. It will be highly uncertain, and having a university degree, just any university degree, will actually not guarantee access to some of these coveted jobs. Now, that doesn't mean that there will not be work. One of the biggest misconceptions about automation is that work will disappear. That's wrong. There will be plenty of work, but it will not necessarily be the kind of attractive jobs. Machines cannot substitute a tourist guide, a health worker in a retirement home, or a guard at the entrance of a shop. In our modern times, rather than a factory worker tightening bolts in the assembly line, our Charlie Chaplin character is now going to be a security steward at, say, a Barca game. There's going to be plenty of those jobs. Now, to understand those low wages, this lack of mobility, this polarization, we need to be vigilant about the role of the firm in the economy. While work in modern times suffer, big business is actually thriving. And this is where society needs your critical thinking and your participation in the debate most. Let me give you an example. In a recent, well-publicized case in the international press, the company Mylan that produces a thing called EpiPen, it's a medical device that is used to inject adrenaline shots for people with severe allergic reactions. It's a lifesaver for numerous children and adults. The total product cost is estimated to be about $35. It's currently sold for $609. The company has 90% market share, and it's reporting profits of $4.2 billion per year. This has been a case that has been controversial and has created outrage, especially by those with allergies. Unfortunately, EpiPen and the company Mylan is not an isolated instance. In fact, on average, firms now report higher profits than ever. They sell their good at higher prices, and their corporate profits have gone up by a factor 4. So they're basically 4 times larger than they were a couple of decades ago. It is not the case that this is true for all firms, but it is a trend. It's a trend that there is more monopoly power by firms. Now, this has detrimental consequences for the consumers and for the workers. The consumers because they pay higher prices, and the workers because their wages are driven down in these monopolistic markets. Now, granted, some of the inequality that I was talking about earlier and this polarization is due to technological change and to globalization. But what is often ignored in the debate, in the public debate, is that a large part of this kind of polarization and inequality is actually due to the rise in market power. Never since 1940 have firms had so much market power. And it's that monopoly power, by the way, that was precisely the reason for the economic inequality 1 century ago. Nowhere more than here in Barcelona, we fondly reminisce about modernism. This is an expression of art and culture and architecture that came together with economic progress. And this was economic progress at that time from the introduction of basically electricity and telephones. But we also tend to forget how abruptly modernism came to an end with economic inequality, severe social tensions, and yes, ultimately with war. Now, the fact that people feel disengaged and left out can to a large extent be remedied. In 1944, in a review of Hayek's The Road to Serfdom, George Orwell wrote, "The trouble with competitions is that somebody wins them." Professor Hayek denies that free capitalism leads to monopoly. Of course, Orwell was not an economist. And 70 years later, as economists, we know that monopoly power is damaging and that antitrust regulation is actually possible or able to rein in this monopoly power. What we seem to have forgotten is that we need to work hard to do that, to rein in this natural tendency for firms to create monopoly power. This tendency is most acute in times of rapid technological change. In the last few decades, companies like Apple, Google's Alphabet, Amazon, they have been doing exactly that. They have been using new technologies to create and entrench their market power. Now, this brings enormous benefits to very few, but it also creates huge problems and has harmful consequences for most of the working population. I want to invite you, as an excellently trained economist, to assume your responsibility and to lead in the public debate. We hear too few solid arguments and too many populist appeals by politicians, bloggers, and journalists that are not based on facts and science. And I really hope you will enter into the debate and make a solid case for those who have most to lose or who actually have already lost. These are the ones who cast a vote, often against their own self-interest, in elections like Brexit in the UK, the votes for Trump in the US, and yes, also here in our own elections in Catalonia and Spain. In a way, they're not to blame, because they are inundated with misleading and often wrong information about their own economic interests. Given your knowledge and training, it is your responsibility to uncover and spread the truth, to make decisions based on facts, not on fake news. Now, in addition to my appeal for your social involvement, I would like to invite you also to follow your passion whenever you make a decision about your personal future. Yes, money matters. But I hope that the choice you make, or the choices that you make, are going to reflect something that you are passionate about. I guarantee you, and actually your parents, that following your passion is in your own good interest. Whether that is working for an NGO, or taking a year off, or just doing a job that is maybe paid a little bit less. While I was a student, I had a housemate who was an Egyptologist. He knew everything about pyramids and mummies, and at that time, a job in consumer marketing was the most desired by recent graduates. He was, in fact, the first to be hired by Procter & Gamble, just because he was passionate. He ended up applying the same type of passion he had for cursive hieroglyphs on the papyrus of Ani to designing, yes, the marketing campaigns of Head & Shoulders. Passion is actually the single best way to sell yourself. You might have been able to fake 1 or 2 answers on exams in the last 4 years. The President of the United States has been accused of spreading fake news. Survey evidence suggests that 48% of women, and yes, 11% of men, have faked orgasm. You cannot fake being passionate about what you do. In the Netflix series of your life, you have just finished a beautiful episode. But you have an entire season in front of you. I wish you the best of luck with whatever you do. I'm totally convinced that you will build a rewarding professional career, but I also hope that you will follow my appeal, that you will exercise your expertise as a professional economist or a manager, and that you will be vigilant and vocal about the well-functioning of the economy. We need facts and scientific arguments, as well as your involvement as an expert in the public debate. Whichever decision you take, be passionate about what you do. And above all, ladies and gentlemen, please don't fake it. Thank you.